Hello everybody, this is Havoc and welcome to Victoria 3. Today's video is on first steps. These are essentially the things you need to consider from picking a nation to assessing your country and even some actual first steps once you've done that assessment. My goal here is to try and help you figure out what nation you should choose, well, more of what to look for in a nation that you want to play as. And then again, give you some advice. So if you come out of this video knowing at least a little bit more of what to do, then I feel like I've been successful. So with that out of the way, let's get right in. First and foremost, you have to pick your nation. I know that seems a little obvious, but it is what it is. And you have several nations to choose from. If we take a look at the country main screen, you can see exactly what you might be getting into. There are nations large and small. On January 1st of 1836, Russia, the United States, the UK, even France, they're all over the place. And you have smaller countries, even Persia would be considered small. You have Mexico, you have Central America, you have all sizes to choose from. And it can be a little daunting to figure out what you want to do. So instead of choosing one right here, let's go back a step. If you're looking for a nation that Paradox recommends, which has honestly been consistently a good start, then you have 4 areas to do the quote-unquote tutorial from. Learning the game is playing a campaign guided by challenges to help you learn how the game works and how to play it. All of these will be challenge-based, by the way. Economic dominance focuses on production, your market reach, and things of the economy. Hegemony is on global domination and figuring out how to do that as best as possible. An egalitarian society teaches you the politics, liberty and equality for the world, ensuring opportunity and raising your standard of living. Now, I will say this, these are all great nations to play as, and indeed I have played as all of them. But one thing that I would caution you on is going too big. If this is your first Victoria game, you don't need to play as the United States or Great Britain or even the Ottoman Empire or Russia or the Great Qing. Starting too large can be overwhelming. Believe me, I've played all of those nations and they are indeed overwhelming if you don't know what to look for. So instead, I do recommend learning the game with Sweden or Belgium. And the reason that I really enjoy Victoria 3's tutorial series is they are challenge-based. It's not hand-holding like it is in Crusader Kings 3, but rather you are given challenges. Those challenges may be build a port or import this, or do something that is objective based that you can discover on your own. But if you get stuck, you can ask them to hold your hand and tell me how, which will lead you in that step by step, or you can tell me why. And I think both are equally as important. Telling me why will give you the reason. Why do I want to build 5 coal factories in my region? Why don't I want to build this? Or what kind of laws will determine X? It is a very great tutorial series, but it is, I will say, much more hands-off than their previous games. So if you are looking for a step-by-step tutorial, that's not necessarily what you'll get here. But regardless, what we are going to do is we are going to go for Belgium. Belgium is in the Industrial Revolution. They're actually a very solid start to allow you to grasp all of the aspects of the game at once, with the exception of war, in my opinion. So we're going to jumpstart as Belgium, and we're going to start assessing the situation that Belgium starts at in this next section. Assessing your situation will essentially help you figure out the capabilities of your country, because it's pretty crucial to know what you need to do going forward. And there is one area that I pretty much always start with, and that is your market, which heavily affects your economy. Now, we're not going to deep dive into this just right now, but I am clicking on the different types of goods available in my market. Selecting the market tab will allow you to see where you have overproductions, where you have underproductions, who is buying what, how many sell orders or buy orders. A sell order is obviously what is being produced. A buy order is what is being bought. And by clicking on any of these, you can see exactly where they are being produced and what product is being consumed by whom. So it's a pretty important thing, but it really gives you a great oversight on what you might be needing or what you have excess of. Not only that, you need to pay attention to market price. Market price is essentially the price that is being paid relative to a standard set price that is within the game. So we can see here that paper is currently 41 gold pounds, whatever you want to call it, which is currently almost 40% over the standard market price. We have a deficit of paper, which is something you might think about getting taken care of right away. Furniture, groceries, services, even grain are all things that are needed, but should you actually produce them? And here's my kind of rule of thumb. It is completely my own philosophy here. But as a general rule, I'm not terribly concerned with any product that is underproducing less than 25%, unless there's really just nothing else that I need to do building wise, politically, anything of that nature. Now, if you are here and you need something, we need, what do we need? We need some furniture. So if I need furniture, I can import it. Or if I have an overproduction of it, I can export it. What you need to be concerned about when importing is, one, the availability and productivity of a trade route, in which case the Portuguese market would provide us 11 pounds, essentially 61 cents per employee that's needing it. But what you have to think about too is that a trade route typically costs around 15 bureaucracy. We have an overproduction of bureaucracy. So we could do this. However, if you do not, the more in debt that you go with bureaucracy, the more tax waste there is. So you need to check the authority balance. If you can afford it, then hopefully you can do it. But it's also recommended to start out with basic things. Things like super basic goods, like grain or iron, even coal, would all be great things to import right off the bat to try and get your economy started. Now, if we see that there is an overproduction of a basic good, let's just say that it was grain, how can I refine that is another question you might want to look at. Simply hovering over here allows you to see where it's produced and what it can be used in. So if we had an overproduction of grain, your food industries and your livestock ranches can use that to generate something else. Not to mention your pops consume things like grain anyways. But it's important to think about this, to see if you can utilize a basic good to turn it into a refined good that you might be able to export or consume by your own country. Next up is your income. Are you making money or are you losing it? Now, income is pretty complex, but you can see an easy breakdown by hovering over the income on your screen. It gives you a basic revenue and an expense report, or if you want a more detailed way and a way to really affect your money, you can simply go to the budget tab. Now, we'll dive deeper into income and expenditures in its own guide, but here you can see areas that you are making money and areas that you are losing it. Now, some of your most common streams of revenue are going to be taxes, and there are several types of taxes. A regular taxation level based on your tax laws, income taxes, poll taxes, consumption taxes, which is a tax on consuming a certain product within your own country. Dividend taxes, tariffs are going to be another one. Tariffs are a tax on importing or exporting goods. And then minting. Minting is actually your ability to print money, and there are certain taxes tied to it. You'll also have an investment pool transfer, where upper strata employees can actually contribute to a building fund that you would allow you, based on your laws again, to determine what kind of things they can invest in and build, giving you room to not have to pay for it. Diplomatic pacts are simply things like a dominion or a subject tribute, so things to keep in mind, and additional incomes are simply events. Your expenses, they are going to be government and military wages and goods. Now, you can heavily influence this. You can simply reduce wages, which you see here wouldn't reduce things by that much, and we're already in a decent positive balance. But government wages, or government goods rather, are goods that are consumed, as you can see here, from your government administration, your ports, and your universities, and you can see what we're spending it on: paper and clippers. The same thing for your military. We're spending money on artillery and small arms. So if we can find ways within our economy to import those goods, like I mentioned, or to go ahead and do something, I don't know, like make your own stuff, then you could reduce that price, therefore making you more money. And on the flip side, welfare payments are completely law dependent. Subsidies are the government's ability to take over an industry to ensure that it stays profitable. You'll want to do this in order to, one, keep pops employed, because pops who get fired turn radical, but also if an industry is struggling momentarily or for a little bit that you desperately need, subsidizing that cost will ensure that they stay productive no matter employment status. Very crucial. Diplomatic pacts as an expenditure is if you owed reparations or if you were a subject state paying tribute. Interest is a very interesting one, because if you go into financial debt, what's going to happen is that you are actually borrowing from the capitalists, from the shop owners, from the people who own the public sector. You are borrowing from them and you are paying them in interest. It's a very interesting concept that works very well to obviously make your bigger, more powerful pops even richer. And then additional expenses are, of course, those events. Now, I do want to say this, that if you aren't making a lot of money and you have a decent bit of authority, you can see authority right here, you can actually go into consumption taxes. Consumption taxes do tax everyone who consumes the product. So by having a consumption tax, you will get radicalization from a lowered standard of living because they won't have as much money to live off of. And you will also just simply reduce a standard of living across the board. So it's a bit of an iffy situation. Use it if you need it, absolutely, but also figure out ways to climb yourself out to where you can remove it. See here that we could have 4.65 thousand gold added every week to our revenue if we taxed a consumption tax on grain. So that is way to do it, but again, it will increase radicalization, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Next up is your population. We need to assess what kind of pops your country is comprised of. It's important to grasp an idea of who you'll be working with at the start of your country. Now, you can look at your pops, you can at least see your population here, you can see its population growth, but one of the best ways to get a good look is by going to the population tab. Here you see a breakdown of the different pops in your system. Total population, those who are impoverished, which is below the standard of living, and then politically involved, politically inactive. Politically involved and inactive is the state at which they contribute political power. You can see we have a lower, middle, and upper strata, all with their different standards of living, and then further broken down into profession, political strength, cultures, religion, all of that stuff. But the important thing to note here is that this does not represent everyone. You don't get a list, you can't filter down, so you need the detailed list. And this is a very important list to at least look at briefly if you want to, but something to always consider. Pops are broken into a handful of designations in this list. First, every single one is broken up into their profession. This is from peasants to aristocrats to engineers to officers in your military. They each obviously have part of the lower, upper, or middle strata, but further than that, your pops are broken up into a series of designations, primarily into their profession. We have every pop who has a job is filtered into all of these designations, from peasants to farmers to academics to servicemen and everything in between. From this front end, we can see a little bit about them, their population. How many of them are there in this profession? Whether they are active or politically inactive. These people are politically inactive, so they don't support an interest group. That's very interesting and important to remember. However, they do have an interest group. They are just not supporting it necessarily. They don't contribute to its clout, to its political power. And then, of course, we can also see their standard of living as an average. That as an average is very crucial, because what we're going to see as we go down to laborers, that the job profession is then further broken down into other subgroups, from their culture to their pop religion to their region in which they live. And then you can see there are some unemployed, but to where they live, which means that any variation of these four sections will create a new pop group inside of the detailed list. All of these people are still laborers, but they all have different things about them that make them a little bit more unique. You'll also see the different standards of living. So while certainly, without a doubt, there are some very well-off to-do laborers, the Flemish Catholic people in Flanders who work at the furniture market are living life decently well compared to, well, we'll go to the Wallolian Catholic people in Wallonia that are working at steel mills. There can be migration as a result of this, but we're not going to get into that for this video. But it is important to remember that each of these people are represented fully in your game, and you do at least need to know that they are there and be aware of them so you can know how to affect things inside of your own country. This is very overwhelming. The population system alone is still something that after 60 hours of playing, I don't have a firm grasp on it. But I do know a couple of big ones. First and foremost, I have to say that a pop's political clout does matter. Now, the extent to which it matters depends on who they are and the interest groups that they support. For instance, the lower strata people will have significantly less clout than your upper strata. That is simply because politically wise, these upper strata are going to be more politically active, going to be more involved. Their future is more in the hands of the day-to-day actions of the country, whereas your lower strata is not. And we can get a real good view by going back to the detailed lists. For instance, there are 1.01 million laborers in the country of Belgium who are contributing a political strength of 519,000. That means out of all of everything, their power is at 519,000. If we go down to the aristocrats, there are currently 56,000 aristocrats to the 1.01 million laborers, but they are actually contributing slightly more political strength. And on top of that, you can see what the interest groups do support overall, and it just gives you a really good way. This means that who you interact with, who you employ, who you give credence to, who you bring up the standard of living does have an effect on the politics of your country. Now, focusing on richer pops is certainly a good idea as they contribute more overall, but focusing on them and leaving the lower strata behind will cause radicals to rise up, which eventually could shift things into a balance not in your favor. However, lifting up the standard of living overall, especially with your lower strata, gives a lot more political weight to those strata, which could also not be in your favor. It's a risk versus rewards, but there's many ways to approach it. I just want to make this accessible to you. And the second thing that we have to mention here is a pop's needs. Being able to assess what your pops need to increase their standard of living is absolutely crucial to this game. You can get at that idea in the market tab. For instance, we saw we needed a little bit of grain, which means that, yeah, they're consuming a lot of grain. We should probably make some more. But digging into the standard of living for your stratas can also give you a more cohesive without going step by step based on all those subgroups. So if you hover over impoverished, you can see that the standard of living for the lower strata is 10.9. Now that's not great, and we see they pay 13.2% of their income in taxes. But more importantly, they pay an average of 6% higher in goods to the base price of what their goods cost. And by hovering over that 5.8, we get a breakdown, which is filtered by how much of their expenditures go towards certain products. We can see the top 5 are grain, liquor, clothes, furniture, and services, of which only liquor is under the relative price. So on average, they are paying anywhere from 5 to 25% more than what the base price should be. And of those top 5 services, you are looking at 60% of their total expenditures. That's a problem. And that means that the standard of living for your lower strata cannot be achieved until you meet their most basic needs of grain, clothes, furniture, and services, just to start. Now, that is the lower strata. The middle and upper strata are going to have a very, very different time. As you can see, these guys are actually paying significantly more overall than the lower strata, although you could say they could afford it more. And their needs are very, very different. They want luxury clothes and luxury furniture and wine and regular furniture. and they're paying an exorbitant amount for it. So even the upper strata cannot climb out of that standard of living until you address those resource shortages. I highly recommend taking a look at your overall standard of living and figuring out where you need to be in order to start bringing that standard of living up, because it will go a long ways. Standard of living decreases increase radicals in your country, and it's not something you want to deal with, so it should be something that you try and address early on. Last but not least, in our assessment of our nation is our laws. Now, we're not going into politics here. We are simply going to look at laws because it's important to know what your nation is doing at the start of the game and knowing where, if, when, and how you can change said laws. I highly recommend looking over all of these to figure out your options. Right now we have wealth voting, for instance, which gives us authority, political strength from votes, wealth threshold for voting, and legitimacy, and it also unlocks women's suffrage. And we can see that that is endorsed by the industrialists and the intelligentsia and rejected by the trade union. We have the capabilities of going after something else, which would be universal suffrage. But you'll notice the difference here. We lose all of our authority, which is important for, say, consumption taxes or for decrees. You have a lot less political strength from votes. Actually, you have more, excuse me. And then you also lose the wealth threshold for voting, right? Because it's universal suffrage. Every adult person is given an equal vote. And then you also gain a little more legitimacy. But you're going to have a hard time passing that. And the reason being is because you have to, for one, the interest group that wants it has to be in your government. So we can see that the intelligentsia is okay with it, and they are in our government. I could not enact a policy that is only supported by the armed forces if I don't have the armed forces in my government. We're not going to go over government reform because I don't think you should really do it early on. But as you can see, if we are over to wealth voting again, the other reason, so the intelligentsia are endorsing it, and because of their clout, you have a 12.9%. If their clout was higher, you would be able to do more. And it is only supported by the intelligentsia and the trade unions, but you will see a lot of kickback from industrialists and landowners, which means that as soon as you start enacting this, it doesn't mean that it is enacted. You're trying to run it through the system. You will see radicals skyrocket from industrialists and landowners. -20 is how desperately they oppose that, and that's a lot. So consider things when you're going through here, what it would happen to your nation when you decide to do that. Just because you want to make an ultra progressive country in 1836 doesn't mean you simply can or bypass laws willy-nilly. Many of these laws, as you're going to look through here, have drastic changes. Per capita to land-based, I would actually lose almost 9,000 gold per week from the medium tax rate, because that's simply the different land base. We don't have a lot of land, so why would we do that? So just please keep in mind when you're thinking about those. All right, so we have assessed our country to the best of the short time span that we have. It's time to pick your first tech, because that can have a good effect. Now, technology is an interesting point. It's an interesting piece to start off with, because there's so many ways that you can start to develop your country. Now, technology is broken down into production, military, and society. And each country starts with their own progression, so that's kind of the first part to keep in mind. 99% of these techs are the same. The exception, I think, is opium and silk over in the east. Outside of that, I can't honestly tell you. So everyone starts with the same, but their progression is going to be different. Now, hopefully you have assessed your own country and are figuring out exactly the direction that you want to at least attempt to go. And that affects what technology you choose. For instance, as Belgium, we're not going to focus on our military. And so if you're not going to focus on your military, and you're not maybe super developed as a nation, it might be better to look at some societal things. Perhaps something like, I don't know, egalitarianism, which gives you a good change of laws options, which would be really, really nice. Or even something like banking, which allows you to print more money and even things like central banking, which reduces the loan interest rate. I mentioned going in debt on the income, or even like modern sewage, which increases your construction sector max, infrastructure from POPs, and infrastructure from population, which is very, very helpful. Or maybe you are like Belgium, and in which case you start with a lot of industrialization, so focusing on some industrial things that bring you some new production methods like patent stills, for food industries, or even the Bessemer process, which helps with steel mills, the water tube boiler, which provides a ton of production methods for several different industries. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do. Now, I would say that there is no right or wrong tech to start as. I believe there are definitely technologies that will give your country a leg up based on your current situation, but that is honestly up for you to decide how you want to progress your own country. But you also have to consider this, and the last thing with tech is that you have technology spread. As more nations are discovering a certain technology, it will start unlocking and researching within the production, the military, and the society level. You don't get to pick this technology spread. It is automatically picked for you based on the nations going around you and what they are researching. Now, there are two directions you can utilize this. One, you basically have 3 techs at all time being researched. So you could choose your own that's different from those 3 and have 4 techs at any point in time being researched. Or if a technology is spreading to you that you could utilize a little bit sooner, you can also select that technology, which will allow you to research it faster. But you don't have to. You have some breathing room in the directions you want to go, but seriously keep in mind with your country to get an idea and a goal set forward so you can know what to do, because just randomly selecting technologies will honestly leave you in the dust in comparison with other countries. So we went with modern sewage, which affects infrastructure, which is not a random choice, considering that now that we're out of assessing that situation and picking our tech, we can start building. And every time, if you are a relatively large nation, or if you have the capabilities, I'm not talking about super small nations, you should start with construction sectors. Without construction sectors, your ability to build anything is severely hampered. All buildings require construction. It's a resource. It's not anything that you can stockpile. It's not anything of that nature. And without construction sectors, you'll start at a very, very low amount. We start with 2 construction sectors in Belgium, which are each contributing 5 construction per level, right? So without that, I would be at 5 construction total. Now, one thing you have to consider is that, let's go to buildings. An urban building such as a food industry, it will cost you 450 construction. If we had no construction centers, it would take a very, very long time, 90 weeks. That's a lot. Even things like farms cost you 150, which would be 30 weeks. So you can see where construction sectors come in handy. We have literally tripled our ability to build a building. Now, I will say that your construction number, the amount of construction that you put towards a building, is limited on various factors. I do believe it's limited mainly to production methods. So for instance, I think we start out at 15 to 18 construction. If I am building 3 buildings, I have them in the construction queue, I am only going to fill up 18 for that first building. If I had 36, or let's just say that it's 30, if I had 30 building resource and each building has 15 as its max at any given time, I will build 2 buildings at once, so on and so forth. If you have 100 construction at once, you're not devoting 100 construction a week to a single building, even if that's the only one in your queue. You simply won't utilize all your construction. Now, there is a couple of considerations regarding construction sectors, and that is, do not go crazy with them. Like any other building, construction sectors have production methods and good consumptions, right? That's what this is. We can see if we knock this down to wooden buildings, we would save on tools. It would cost a little more in fabric and wood, but it would also reduce the construction capabilities. Iron frame buildings increase the construction ability while also costing more resources. Steel frame, it's the same way. Arc welding, it's the same way. So when you use these, you will consume those goods and you will be potentially causing a demand that you can't meet. We'll just say it like that. Now, when you do build, you will see a negative balance here. And in fact, let's go ahead and build. We'll build 2 in Wallonia and 1 in Flanders, and we will let this roll. All right, now that it is in the process, we were at 11.4. We are now at 6.9. And we can see down here a temporary national expense of 7.26. That is the cost of what it costs to currently build using our construction sectors. We can see that once I'm done building those, it'll pop back up to 11.4. So it's not that bad. But if I had 20 construction sectors, I have 2 right now. So if I did 20, my temporary national expenses would get minus 72,600. Not to mention the costs would go up for the resources that I am using. So you can see, while I would be building a heck of a lot more at once, I would also be draining my treasury incredibly quickly. So it's not a good idea to build a ton of them. I start out with maybe 5 total from the beginning, unless my economy and the country I'm playing as can just drastically support those needs. That way I'm balancing my income, even if it's a temporary expense. If you build too many of them, you will, believe me, 100% hemorrhage your economy if you aren't that careful. So like I said, constructing 3 to 4, having about 5, maybe 6 total would be a good idea to start for your country. And then beyond that, you can start building your other buildings. All right, we're almost through this. Your next step is to be looking at resources. Now, remember earlier how I said you should fill in some gaps that maybe your pops need. We need grain. This is where you can do so by importing resources. It's something that I had mentioned earlier. So if we go here and we see our balance, we have a grain deficit. If we want to, we can start importing those. The British market will give us 3.6 per employee, which means we'll make $210 for something that we're importing. So really, we're not doing anything negative. The only thing negative might be that we are making it cheaper in our market. Now, that's not necessarily bad, because the cheaper we make it in our market, the cheaper it is for our pops to consume it. Basic goods are a great start to import in the beginning of the game. It gives you breathing room. It increases your standard of living for certain pops if that's how you choose, or it can give you an influx of basic resources in your refined places, such as we have our furniture market or the food industries or even paper. By bringing in wood, we would be able to drop the price of wood in our market, which would allow paper to be more profitable, which is what we want anyways. One thing that you could do if you really, really wanted to, and if there was a market availability, is going after your luxury resources. You can see, for instance, we have a deficit a little bit. Can I import that? I can bring it in from the Prussian market, which would drop, you can see here, that this would drop my porcelain, from 122.5 to 50.7. If you have the bureaucracy to do so, this would be okay, because you're reducing the price for pops across the board. I typically only do basic goods, but it doesn't mean that you have to follow exactly what I say. The last big area that I would consider looking at is diplomacy. I won't go terribly deep into this mechanic. Most countries start with a great deal of influence to be able to utilize. Now, as the smaller nation of Belgium, we are surrounded by some pretty large countries. So we have France, Great Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia. Even Spain would be someone we might have to consider. As a smaller nation, it would be advisable to find bigger ones that you don't mind getting nice and cuddly with, especially for protection. Now, as a larger nation, improving your relations with other major powers is a good idea, so that way if you go to war, as long as they have a good relationship with you, they are less likely to come in and support the opposition in a war. Now, I will say, I don't think you need to exhaust all of your influence, but it's not a bad idea to simply develop some relations. So we're going to go with France, we're going to go with Prussia, and we're going to go with, we'll do Great Britain. Now, the reason being, those are the ones that I'm surrounded with. Eventually, I could potentially get a customs union and join a market of one of the larger countries. But basically, if I honestly want to go after Netherlands, by having really good relations with some of the larger countries, again, they may not get involved. But having good friends early on is a game changer that I think everyone should consider for their first steps. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I have to admit there is so much to this game. And these first steps are just the tip of a massive iceberg. Despite that, I hope covering the areas that I covered will help you understand and get a better idea of just what it takes to start your campaign, and that you aren't quite so baffled when you first boot up. If you did enjoy this content, consider supporting the channel by subscribing and leaving your comments with questions or praise, whatever suits your fancy. If you haven't already picked up the game, you can support this channel financially by purchasing the game so you get a game. By using the link in my description, I also get a little bit of a commission. It's not much, but it goes a long ways to really and truly show your support. Now be on the lookout for more content on this game in the very near future. This is Havoc, and I'll see you in the next video on Victoria 3.